Hey, it looks like we have a good group to get started on our webinar. Thank you all for coming and welcome to the Gray Associates Demand Trend webinar, designed specifically for community college professionals. This is not your average webinar. It's an opportunity to gain insights into labor market data for program evaluation and use data to debunk common myths about community college programs. I want to thank you again. I can't thank you enough for attending. You will receive a link to the webinar recording and presentation slides in the next few days. Please look for it in your email. We have with us Bob Atkins, not only Gray's CEO, but also a program evaluation expert and best-selling author among higher ed publications. A few housekeeping items to get started with. At the bottom of your Zoom screen, there is a place labeled Q&A. Please feel free to add your questions there. We will get to as many as we can during the session, and we'll follow up later with you if we run out of time. Have you been wondering about launching a particular new program or what the potential job market looks like for your students? At the end of the presentation, we will give you the opportunity to review programs in real time with PES and Gray's Director of Customer Success. You can put your program request into the Q&A at any time during the presentation. Now, without further ado, I will turn things over to our CEO and founder, Bob Atkins.
Thank you very much, Marianne. Appreciate the gracious introduction. And my thanks to all of you as well for joining us this afternoon. With that, let's jump in and begin talking about this month's data, but a little pause first about Gray and a program evaluation system, or PES. Somewhat of a new term. And what is a program evaluation system, you may well ask? Well, we believe that in terms of data and software, you need to cover four broad areas. Markets for programs. Are there students interested in this program? Are there jobs for graduates? How intense is the competition? Margins for programs. Do they make money? How much revenue, cost, and margin does each program generate? Now, of course, you don't need that to run your school at a profit. That's not the objective for any community college. But you do need margins for some programs to cover the cost of other programs that can't support themselves. So there's a web of cross subsidies that those margins support. Academic standards, obviously important, whether that's ensuring that your nurses pass the NCLEX or that you're meeting your own internal academic standard, for example, for retention and graduation rates. And finally, all of these things need to be analyzed in a way that supports and decisions made in a way that supports the mission of the institution. So let's focus in a little bit on that word decision. When people use a program evaluation system, it doesn't give them the answer. It gives them the data they need to inform their own judgment about what to do. To get to a good decision, you actually need to involve the right people in the right process so that you have decisions that apply your judgment, so that you have a correct interpretation of your mission, and so that you integrate knowledge that people in a local market would have that can never really be covered in a system. And there's always some sort of local issue that we can't be aware of, that the software can't be aware of, that needs to be taken into account when you're looking at your program portfolio. So when we say program evaluation system, it's more than data or software. It's the data, software, and the people and process required to make a good decision. Now let's find out what some of the data says. To do that, it helps to spend a moment to understand what the data sets are and what their comparative strengths and weaknesses are. So at the front edge of information is Google search volumes. We can collect those every month. What we'll see today is actual search volumes for June. So it's very current. It's reasonably comprehensive. We capture search terms for about 15 to 20 terms for each of 900 programs. And there are about 1,500 programs in the US. We can do that by geography. So we really get it down to what people are searching for in your market. Again, very current. Enrollment, however, is a better manifestation of what people ultimately choose to do. That data is not quite as current, though. That's now, it updates 3 times a year. We're looking at fall spring 22 data at this point. So it's a little bit less current, but still very current, very comprehensive. It comes from the National Student Clearinghouse, reliable source, and it updates often. Then we have IPEDS, which has been the traditional data source for this sort of information. And IPEDS is very comprehensive. It's a good indicator of overall program size. We don't think it's a very good indicator of trends because it's dated. When I say dated, how dated is a good question. Well, the most current IPEDS data, sadly enough, is 2021 spring graduates. So already we're back a couple of years. But if you think about it, by the programmatic data in IPEDS which is what we have for 2021, shows us who completed, not who's in the program. And as a result, it reflects the decisions of people who chose their major 2 to 4 years before graduating. So really that data is telling us what people wanted, say 3 years before 2021, or that would be all the way back to 2018. So we're talking about data about what students want and the trends in what students want that's 5 years out of date. So be careful with IPEDS. It's kind of old and stale. Again, not a bad overall indicator, not a bad indicator for competition because it doesn't change that fast, but not a good indicator of what students want. Now I'll spend one more second on student demand. Why do you care? Many community colleges really focus in on employment and data and employer needs when they're designing academic programs. Unfortunately, this can go seriously wrong. I'll give you an example. There was a program that one of our clients developed after this, in between uses of our system, and they rolled it out. It was funded, fortunately, by some local employers rather than the college itself. It was optics, and when they were all done, they had put up a lab. They'd spent $500,000. The employers definitely needed employees, but students just weren't interested, and they ended up with 5 students in that program. Tremendous investment, really with no return for the school or the employers because they didn't get enough graduates to be worth their trouble. So you do need to take into account what students want, or you can make some very significant investments that don't benefit the institution students or the employers because there are no students coming out. So keep that in mind. You need student demand data. By the way, you also need employment data. That's very important. And what you're looking for programs where both student demand and employer need are high. Those are the sweet spot where everyone benefits. So let's take a look at some leading indicators, in particular Google. And for some reason, my computer has decided to take a holiday. There we go. 1 sec, let me just go back. So why do we look at Google and how reliable it is as an indicator? The bottom line is it's a pretty good indicator, but it's far from perfect. So if we look at the size of a program, that's what we have here on the y-axis or vertical axis, versus a Google search volume. If it were perfect, all these dots would be aligned right along this dashed line. And Google would be a perfect indicator of how big a program is. Well, it's imperfect, and that's partly because there's a lot of noise in the size of a program. You can see there are a bunch here that are really hovering around 0 that are going to screw up any estimate like that. But overall, the R-squared, or the degree to which Google search volumes explain or predict the number of students enrolled, is about 33%. It's a lowish number, but not bad for a single variable. Very few, if you take one variable, it's unlikely you're going to get a super high correlation. You'd have to control for a number of other factors to get to high predictive accuracy, something up in the 80s or 90s. So for one factor, this is not bad. Again, it's what I would call a good but imperfect indicator, and it gives us a sense of what people are looking for. Here, what we're looking, by the way, is a comparison between 2021 Google search volume and fall 2022 enrollment. So we're assuming that Google search a year ago is an indicator of what's going to happen in the future. And indeed it is, just not a perfect indicator. What's it saying? Well, first, let me explain how to read this chart. 2021 is the black line there. 2022 is the light blue, and 2023 is that green color. So obviously we're hoping for here is that each of those lines will be higher than the other. So 2021 would be the lowest. If we're growing, 2022 would be better. And if we continue to grow, then 2023 is going to be even higher. And you can see, actually, as we look across this data, that's pretty much true. Specifically, last month, Google search volumes for workforce programs were up 6%. So there's room for optimism here. And as many of you know, there's plenty of pessimism around enrollment. And we'll talk about that another day, but that pessimism, I think, can be overrated. And in particular, I don't think people should use these external market indicators as an excuse for not enrolling students. there are headwinds, no doubt, but schools that have taken action to address those headwinds have been able to grow in every size and shape. So don't accept the headwinds as an excuse, the demographic cliff, COVID, et cetera. Those are all things that are real, but with appropriate actions, you can offset those and continue to grow as an institution. Subject to my next book, by the way, is How to Grow. And here we can see that at least one of our headwinds has turned into a tailwind, and overall search and interest in workforce programs is actually increasing at this point. Brand search volume, that is search for academic, this is for academic brands, that would be institutional brands, is up 2% as well. That's important because there are two ways people search for college. One is, I know what I want to go into, let's say nursing. So I search for nursing and find programs in my area. And that would be the programmatic search we saw a second ago. The other way is I already know, I'm not sure what I want to major in. So I'm going to look for the different college brands in my neighborhood and see which school I like best. That's what we call brand search. And we see both of these trending up. That's a very positive indicator. It means both the folks who are searching for a particular program and those who are searching for a college to go to are increasing. So what's big out there? Well, let's start with our direct workforce programs, or what I call career and technical education, CTE. And 6 of the certificate programs were CTE, the biggest were CTE programs, led off with cosmetology, followed closely by commercial bus and truck driver. This is a big program, pretty interesting. I think people often think it's a lot of cost to start. Shouldn't be. You can lease the trucks and then you just need a parking lot for them to drive around on. So you can get into this one relatively low cost. And that's part of the reason. And by the way, we need a ton of truck drivers. At some point in the future, that'll be automated, but it's very hard to tell when automated driving will really come to play. The regulatory barriers are going to be tremendous to make sure that these, a robot-driven truck doesn't drive into the back of a school or something. Electrician is in our top 4 with 199,000 searches. Then we have nail specialist, HVAC, heating, venting, air conditioning at 93,000, and cooking and culinary arts at 65,000. Healthcare has 3 entries. I would have thought this would be bigger actually, or more programs. Medical clinical assistant, one of the biggest programs in the country, makes the list. EMT paramedic and medical billing and coding. And then we have one other program, legal assistant paralegal. Here's a place where automation is going to really make a dent in the job market. A lot of what a paralegal does can now be done with AI, with a little bit of a caution. I don't know if all of you saw the article, but there was a lawyer who did his paralegal work, checking citations and legal precedents, and unfortunately went to court with 3 legal precedents that had come from ChatGPT, only to discover when the opposition investigated it that none of those precedents actually existed. They were all made up by the system. So while there'll be some intrusions on legal paralegal, humans are still going to have to check what comes out of these systems, or they're going to get some very, very bogus results. But I think, checking precedent is exactly a job designed for a computer. And I think it will intrude on the job opportunities for legal and paralegal assistants. Either that or it'll upgrade the job is the other possibility. And while there may be fewer, they'll have better support in terms of technology they can use to do their jobs. Now, what's growing fastest? Interestingly here, MRI is the top of the list with 35% increase in interest in that program, or an increase specifically in Google searches for that program. But then CTE really dominates the list. Electrician, auto mechanics, diesel, all up over 17% or more. HVAC also at 17%, and nail specialist up 14%. So a lot of interest in career and technical education. Healthcare did cop a couple of top spots. I mentioned MRI, but also health and medical records tech. And then we have a bunch of other stuff, ASL, American Sign Language, bookkeeping, and legal assistant paralegal all up. So we're starting to see some trends here with legal, and then our very heavy interest in CTE programs. Now, once people search, we hope that they go on to enroll. So let's see what's actually happening with enrollment. Unfortunately, total enrollment in certificate programs shrank Again, although the drop here is so small as to be insignificant at 0.3%, you could say it's flat. Total enrollment associate programs, different story. It's been going down fast, almost 9%. That rate of decline slowed to 4.3%, but still a substantial decline in total enrollment. Now, for those of you here last month, you know that new enrollment is actually up. So while the total is still processing the prior year declines in new enrollment, the actual number of people entering community colleges and other two-year programs and the certificate programs has started to turn around. So it's 2% new enrollment growth in certificate programs and 4% new enrollment growth in associate programs. So as those larger new cohorts come in, we should start to see these numbers turn positive in total enrollment, but it'll take a little while. What did people enroll in? Well, the biggest program, no surprise, is licensed practical nursing, with 71,000 students enrolled. We only have 2 healthcare programs here, which I actually think is unusual. I would expect healthcare to do a little bit better, but we've got that licensed practical nursing and EMT in the healthcare space. Career and technical education, again, does very well. Welding towards the top of the list, auto, cosmetology, electrician, and HVAC maintenance, all on our top 10. Then we have a couple of business programs that made it as well, business administration general, and bookkeeping and accounting tech making the list. What's growing fastest? I was surprised here. I expected, and often have seen recently, cybersecurity take the #1 slot, but it didn't. That commercial truck and bus driver is actually #1, which shows there is some correlation between what people are doing in Google and what we see here. Information technology hit the #3 slot, and then we have another infotech program, computer and information sciences general, up 12%. So a lot of interest in information technology oriented programs. On the CTE side, in terms of growth, cosmetology, firefighting, and auto mechanic tech, all up 8% or more. We have a couple of other things, criminal justice, and we'll come to this in a great deal more depth, up 10%, entrepreneurship up 9%, and early childhood education and teaching up 9%. And let me do a little diversion here. I think this entrepreneurial studies is going to end up linking up with a lot of programs in communications. So what am I thinking of? I'm thinking of influencers. And with the advent of personal identity and likeness rights in college, and just the general growth of that influencer community and younger people, I think there's going to be a lot of interest in programs that teach you how to build a business as an influencer. That's actually a multi-billion-dollar industry at this point. It's not just for fun anymore. So while I've been a skeptic, I think I was proven wrong on this one. This is the real deal. It's a business. And I think a lot of students are interested in becoming influencers. So that combination of communication skills, some infotech to set up the infrastructure, and then business skills in entrepreneurship, I think could be a very interesting hybrid kind of program.
And Bob, we named it as one of our top, 5 emerging programs back in January, the influencer economy.
Yeah,
This is
agreed.
pretty interesting.
By the way, as a comment about medical assisting, I've been watching that program for years because it intrigued me. There are
Bob, can you check your audio, please? Bob, can I stop you right there? I believe we're having some trouble hearing you.
I'm back, I think.
Yes, you are. Thank you.
Good. I apologize. Something jumped on my screen and took over my audio. So what I was thinking of here is just a quick side view on medical assisting. It was one of the biggest programs in the United States, perhaps the biggest as I recall, but it was driven primarily by for-profits, and that would have been back in the mid to late teens. The regulatory environment turned, as you all remember, very negative on the for-profits. Many, or I would say most of the biggest ones were actually driven out of business. And when that happened, the medical assisting program dropped like a rock from, I'm not going to get these numbers right off the top of my head, but 250,000 completions a year down to more like 50,000 completions a year. A little disappointing to me because I thought everybody else would pick up those students. So the total size of the program wouldn't change that much, but not-for-profits would benefit. That didn't really happen. When the for-profits went away, the students went away, or their students went away. They didn't re-enroll someplace else. So I think it's finally bouncing back a little bit. And again, a good program and could be a very large one as well. All right, let's turn to associate programs. Business is always the biggest. Registered nursing behind it. You know, these are numbers that have been pretty consistent over time. Psychology in third place. We'll come to that. Keep that in mind. We talk about what people really do after they graduate. Then you see computer science, biology, and probably a lot of pre-meds in here. Both these programs, a little bit of engineering. I'm going to jump down bookkeeping and criminal justice and corrections. And we'll spend some time on criminal justice and corrections later on in our presentation. What's happening at the associate level? Here's that cybersecurity leading the pack. This used to be a small niche program growing fast. Now it's a big program still growing fast. So keep that in mind. I think there are a number of different kinds of things that can be taught within a cybersecurity program. And in particular, one of the things I think is often overlooked is that there's probably value in a less technical cybersecurity program for folks who wouldn't necessarily see themselves in the space. But an awful lot of cybersecurity work is actually writing up policies and procedures and communicating to employees and others what the policies are and what the security standards are, and encouraging their participation and compliance with what's necessary for security. So all of that is stuff that can be done by people who aren't super technical. They need a basic understanding of some technical concepts, but really what you need is somebody who can plan, write, interview in order to get the policies from the people who have them in their head, and then maintain all those policies over time. We've learned this the hard way. We have the technical expertise, but we've had to dedicate almost half a full-time person to just developing the responses to all the policy questions and procedures we need to have to be secure. So really a fundamentally different kind of job in security, but nonetheless a big need. Then we see natural sciences, sales and distribution, and our one other there, entrepreneurship, we've touched on. Information, we got computer science, and then 3 career and technical fields where they're also taught at the associates level, real estate, cosmetology, and welding tech. I have to tell you all, I'm a big skeptic of associates programs and trades. I think it might be an interesting thing to add on once people have a certificate, but often these are more education than you need to get the job. And I don't know if that really pays off for the student. So it can, it's not across the board issue, but where there's an opportunity to give them a certificate and let them get to work, I think that's generally to the student's advantage. And then perhaps encourage them to re-enroll to finish up their degree once they're actually working. But again, that's more of an opinion than a fact. Just be careful with it. I've seen people really extend the length of the education required. And in those cases, it was a for-profit, in my opinion, primarily for the benefit of the institution, not the student. So what's happening in non-degree courses? And this is, we look at here, MOOCs, massively online open curricula. And we're going to look at Coursera today. There are a number of MOOCs, and we track a couple of the bigger ones. And today we'll share the data from Coursera. There's a very heavy interest on these platforms in technical programs. So you can see that we've got 5 out of the top 10 here are technical, data everywhere, technical support fundamentals, AI for everyone, UX design, that's user experience design, and a crash course on Python coding language. So yes, tech is big, and these short courses and certificates are very popular for tech programs. We do have other stuff people want, learning how to learn, COVID-19 training, tracing, excuse me, First Step Korean. And by the way, a little bit off this list, but been on it before, were courses in English and in Mandarin, Introduction to Psychology, and Stanford Introduction to Food and Health. So there's a little bit of oftentimes a health and happiness component that you'll see here. But primarily what you're going to find is people taking these short courses and certificates are looking for training in technical subjects. We also track Udemy, and if we were to look at that, it's quite a bit bigger than Coursera. When we share that data, it turns out that the vast preponderance of what they're teaching and people are enrolling in is actually technical programs in things like Python and data science. Where's the growth? Data everywhere. Again, a more of a tech program. We have 6 of the top 10 being tech, UX design, technical support fundamentals. That crash course on Python is not only big, it's growing. Process data from dirty to clean, and share data through the art of visualization. Keep in mind here that while data science requires some pretty advanced technical skills, I think there's a layer below that, and 80% by estimates of a data scientist's time is spent cleaning up the data, identifying places where there are gaps, and filling those in with a variety of technical techniques, finding the errors in the data that need to be eliminated and so forth. Very detail-oriented, time-consuming task. I think could be done with more limited, it's really not technical skills, more limited analytical skills. You don't need to know how to run sophisticated models. You need a good attention to detail. And there are techniques you need to learn for how to clean up data sets. But again, an interesting space there, potentially for specialization. And then we have other, which in this case leads with the Science of Wellbeing, which has been a very popular program, and a lot of concern with that. And it really combines with the mental health issues that we are seeing in today's society. How do I stay well mentally? Learning how to learn, and let's see, Introduction to Psychology, again, related to mental health, and project management, in this case, project initiation, how to start a successful project. Let me go back to that for a second. So why do you care about this? If you are thinking of offering programs, particularly non-degree programs, perhaps at night, these are the kinds of things people want to learn. And you could even integrate this curriculum into what you're teaching. And this is a great opportunity for a flipped classroom where students might do the work in Coursera on their own, but then come into or study on their own, then come into the classroom and get the help they may need, almost a one-on-one with their homework, and fully understanding subjects that are confusing them. So much of this is free, and they have programs to integrate their curricula with the school, so that's out there if you want to take advantage of it. You don't have to develop all these yourselves. So what's going on in the employment market? Again, while we focus a lot on student demand, employment is equally important. And there's some myths out there that are worth worrying about. So the first one is this concept of alignment between what you study and what you do, or what we call the SIPSOC crosswalk, Classification of Instructional Program and Standard Occupation Code. There are standard linkages between those two. If you're regulated as a for-profit, there are some rules about what you can count as a successful student placement. If the occupation is not one of the ones that count for that SIP, you can't count those graduates from a regulatory standpoint. Now, the problem is when you look at the data, there's very little correlation between what people are directly prepared for and what they do. So on the left axis here, we have the percentage of programs. And on the y-axis, we have the percentage of graduates who went into the field for which they were directly prepared. So let's see, let's take one column here. 80 to 100% of the students went into the fields for which they were directly prepared. Well, how many programs are like that? The answer is none. Okay, well, what's next best? Well, let's see how many programs had 60 to 79% of their graduates go into fields for which they are directly prepared. Well, that's 2% of all programs. That's a couple of programs, really. One of them is nursing, by the way. But 78% of programs, fewer than 20% of the graduates go into fields for which they were directly prepared. So this idea that I study psychology so I can become a psychologist is just not true. People who study psychology, 96% of them will go on into a field that is not directly speaking psychology. Doesn't mean there aren't attributes of psychology that they'll take advantage of. For example, it's pretty common to go into marketing from psychology and understanding consumer psychology, how people think and react to commercial communications. That could be very good link and is a pretty common outcome. As we look at an example here, let's take operations management and supervision. You'd think all these people would just go on and become operations managers. And that's what the standard NCS crosswalk, National Center for Education Statistics crosswalk, assumes. They're going to become business teachers, computer systems managers, construction managers, facilities managers, supervisors of mechanics, and so forth. And all in all, they think they're trained to do some 7 or 8 jobs, period. Well, in reality, that's not what happens. There are 8 NCES matched occupations, but in fact, people who study operations management go into 341 different occupations. Over on the right of this chart, we have the top 10. And yeah, they got a couple of them in the CIPSOC crosswalk, but 8 out of 10 they missed. For example, buyers or general and operations managers or management analysts. So and by the way, an important one, chief executives and legislators. So keep in mind that often chief executive is somebody like me, where it's their own company they're chief executive of. So this isn't all Fortune 500 executives, but nonetheless, they're running a business. And so there's what's the implication for you all? First of all, when people tell you there are no jobs for your graduates, chances are they're looking at the wrong data. This is extremely true with liberal arts. There are tons of jobs for liberal arts majors, but a history major is not going to become a historian. That's just not what they do. You go to grad school, by and large, the number one job is we go to grad school and become lawyers. So be very, very careful to make sure you're looking at sources that are collecting actual data on what people do, not what people are supposed to do. The other thing that's important about this is oftentimes when you're trying to, as local employers, there's a myth that, that they need a certain type of graduate. And oftentimes a liberal arts graduate is a good way of addressing their need for a new employee. Then you're going to have to learn the specifics of that field on the job, by the way we always have. So this expectation that I'm going to have to learn the whole job somehow in college and then show up ready to work, I think is a bit of a misnomer in many fields, especially in management. What happened to job postings? Well, this is getting to be almost troublesome. I don't think it's troublesome quite yet. So what's going on with job postings? Well, if we went back to 2020, they really were very, very high. And that was coming out of, 2020 was a low in because of COVID. Then 2021, we saw a huge bounce, and that's the dark blue lines here. Then it started to come down in 2022 and 2023. So let me get this straight. This is 22, this is 23. So 22 is still elevated as we bounce back from COVID. And what we're seeing now is a reversion to more normal job postings levels. I just looked at this report for the federal government, and we're getting back to 2019 level of job postings. So while this may seem like a huge decline, I don't really think that's the right way to think about it. I think we're getting back to normal after a real bust and then boom in job postings caused by COVID. And in this case, we're down 31%, but again, just getting back, I think, to normal. What's the good news? Well, we still have a lot of jobs for certain things. Registered nursing, a lot of jobs, unfortunately, for the wrong reason. There are jobs there not because we have growth in the need for nurses, but because we can't fill the positions we have. So we've got a real crisis here, and something needs to give in the funnel between students entering, the number of seats available for nurses in schools, the number of clinical sites available for the folks who are in school, and the number of graduates we produce who can go and take nursing jobs. That system is broken, I think. We are not allowing enough students to study. We don't really have enough clinical sites, so the hospitals have to open those up. And ultimately, that will address this need. But we can't fix the nursing problem with the nurses we have. We don't have enough. Retail sales, again, bouncing back from COVID, still growing. General and operations managers, computer support specialists, customer service, nursing assistants, which is good because we have all those folks in that program, maintenance repair workers, and elementary school teachers. Where's the growth? Well, first of all, there isn't much. Not surprising when we have a 31% overall decline. We only have 5 occupations that are still growing. Payroll and timekeeping clerks being number 1, and postal service and mail carriers. The feds must be hiring some postmen to walk around out there and deliver our mail. Vet tech still growing, hairdressers, and after that, things are flat to down. What skills are in demand? Office. Keep this in mind as you're educating people. It almost doesn't matter what program they're in. They need to be familiar with Microsoft Office and comfortable using it. That doesn't mean they can write macros, but they need to be comfortable in Excel and Word in particular. Accounting, billing, project management, very interesting set of skills. It cuts across almost every industry. Rehabilitation, merchandising, acute care, data entry, life support, and E-Verify. Now, those are what I would call hard skills or technical skills. People often call these soft skills, and I'm going to change the name because it has a negative connotation. I think these are leadership skills or management skills. Number 1 is management, customer service, planning, operations, sales, leadership, supervision, scheduling, research, and collaboration. These aren't really technical skills per se, but they're the skills you need really to be successful in moving up into management positions in an organization. So we shouldn't downplay these. These are critical things folks need to know or abilities people need to have when they move into the workforce. Half the fastest growing certifications were in healthcare. You can see what they are. Not surprising, as I mentioned, when we do this webinar, you want people in healthcare to be certified to know that they're actually competent at what they're doing. In most other areas, they don't certify those things. So, there's an expectation that people know what they're doing. And if they don't, then you use a different person the next time. But you really don't want to, find out your nurse is incompetent when they're treating you. So when you go through these things, there are certifications required in each of these areas. There are others, CDL driver, security guard license. Oftentimes we see security clearances on this list, and a couple of others, vet tech, STEP certification, accredited financial counselor. Now, I mentioned that people's career paths aren't necessarily logical. Psychology majors don't become psychologists. So here's a couple of examples of career paths for folks, in this case, who studied cosmetology. And we have a new data set we're very excited about, where you can actually see what individual people have done after graduating from college. And you can see this cosmetology graduate didn't do cosmetology. She went on to become an assistant at a rental place. Then she did do a little bit of cosmetology there, 2000 to 2003 as an Avon sales rep. Then became a receptionist, then an assistant manager for the US Open, a crew leader, an independent consultant, and finally a product tester. So they took their training in cosmetology and went on fundamentally, by and large, and did something else, which is fine, actually, as long as the cosmetology degree and that training contributed to their intellectual development and helped them get started. In this case, doesn't look like it was very tightly related. But here's another graduate where there's a much closer logic between what she studied and what she did. And I say she because the majority of cosmetology graduates are female, but there are men in this as well. I do believe this individual was a woman. So here they started off doing education, but that wasn't public school. They were teaching about a particular product, Softsheen, which is a cosmetic. Then they were actually the cosmetologist on a TV show. They went on to become an educator for L'Oreal, stylist in a salon and owner of a salon, an educator. Oroshi is another cosmetics vendor, creator of Mind for Your Own Business class. Teaching folks how to run a salon, an instructor in Chicago youth centers, and finally a job in product evaluation and education for Deborah International. Interesting career. This one very much focused around cosmetics and cosmetology. But as we saw in the other case, that isn't always what happens. And the reason I bring that up too is that we need to make sure that folks graduate with some foundational skills that apply across industries. So if they do change their mind or they can't find the job in their field, they're not high and dry. So to me, those foundational skills are English and some level of math. And I mentioned earlier familiarity with things like Word and Office, so that they can have the basic technical skills that are required in most jobs. Now let's take a look at one program in depth, and we're going to look at student demand, employment, competition, and degree fit. The program we picked this month, first, how to read this chart. On the left-hand side, we have the program name and its zip code. Then we have the overall score. We score on about 50 variables, and they come in 4 categories: student demand, competition, jobs or employment, and degree fit. We color code and we percentile. So first, what's a percentile? Well, it compares each program on this list to all the other programs on the list. And there are about 1,400 programs in the total list. So if you're at the 98th percentile, you're at the top 2% or the top 30 of all programs that we have in our database. Then we color code. So if you're in that top 2%, your color is dark green. If you're between 94 and 97%, it's that medium green, and so forth. As you go from green to pink, you can always keep in mind that our charts, green is good, red is bad. So it's a way of allowing you to visually interpret a chart with dozens of variables on it like this, and quickly understand which programs are stronger and on which dimensions. So this month, we're going to pick criminal justice police science. And you can see it does very well, 97th percentile overall. What's driving that score? Well, student demand is at the 97th percentile. Jobs are 91st percentile. Competitive intensity, not so great, 8th percentile. So you see it's pink as a pretty low rating on competitive intensity. And degree fit in this case is high at 100 percentile. So keep in mind, though, it's pretty binary. If it's a program that requires more than an associate's degree, for example, neuroscience, not even a perfect example, but an MD, that score will be negative. But as long as it's a relevant degree for the type of institution, that's going to be a positive score for it. Let's take a look at this in a little more detail. What's going on with student demand? Well, in terms of the overall volume, first thing that's interesting here is international is pretty strong. That's actually a 92nd percentile score for number for international. So there's some folks who'd be interested in coming here to study police science. Google search volume is good, 70th percentile. It's not awesome, but it's good. Then we look at enrollment, very, very good, 99th percentile. And online and on ground, we're at 20,000, again, 98th percentile. Interestingly, there's a substantial chunk of online students in this program. So keep in mind that's good in the sense that if you want to offer it online, you've got a market for it. It's bad because it means that the big online players are going to be in your market recruiting students. And my guess is that of the 2,720 students here that are taking it online, most of those are going to be at the top 5, one of the top 5 online institutions, not so much at their local college. So it's a really interesting question for you all. First of all, do you really know who's competing in your market? Because most data doesn't report those online folks in your market. We do, by the way. But you do need to keep track of them because they're not going to show up in a lot of other statistics. And then second, of course, you can offer it yourself and compete against those guys. And often you have an edge in your local market because people know who you are. And you particularly have an edge if you want to do a hybrid or low residency program where folks come in not every night, but periodically for the hands-on portion of the training. And frankly, to meet each other and enjoy that social experience that's part of college. And you can offer that. Very difficult for any of the online players to offer that. Now, what's happening to growth here? Very much mixed bag. So Google search is up 22%. So there's reason to believe that it will start to grow, but it is not growing right now. Enrollment's down 22% year over year, and completion volumes are down 2%. They'll continue to decline as that low enrollment rolls through and fewer people complete. But there's reason to be optimistic that may turn around because the Google search volumes are up. But I'd be careful. The enrollment's a pretty good number. and it's down 22%. And that's a big drop. So I think there's reason to believe that this is actually declining right now. With some reason to believe it might perk up, but I wouldn't be sure. Jobs, BLS employment's at the 93rd percentile, so that's good. We've got healthy level of job postings at the 87th percentile. Now, most people who study police science are not going to do police science, as we talked about. So 23% will end up in fields related to this, but that means 77% are going to go off and do something else. So again, those foundational skills become important. There are jobs, 1.9 jobs per graduate. That's about average, so it's not a great number. It's 46th percentile numbers. That's right in the middle of our program data set. What's happening to growth? Well, this is a field that's actually shrinking a little bit. The BLS employment numbers here are down 4.2% most recently, and over the 3 and 10 year period, it's been kind of flat. So we're seeing a little bit of a 1 year downturn. Those often, resolve themselves fairly quickly, but again, a warning signal. All right, now let's take a look at competition. Not surprisingly, almost everybody has a program in criminal justice. 497 institutions, that's the 98th percentile. So more institutions than all but a couple, handful of programs. There's a little bit of a decline. One school dropped out, but then there's an online component here as well, which puts it to 99th percentile for online. So very competitive online as well as on ground. Now, it's good news is the average program completions are 34. So the average program is pretty big. Median, which is the number I really pay attention to, also healthy at 14. But both those numbers are going down, which to me is a sign that the market's a bit saturated when the people who are in the market can't fill their seats. Similarly, on saturation, we've got $16 per click for Google search. That's a 90th percentile. That's a very expensive click. And remember that only about 1% or fewer of those clicks are going to turn into students. So you're talking about $1,600 per student at least in terms of Google search cost if you go through that channel. The competition index at 0.47, that's a 76th percentile for that metric. That's very competitive. And then online, as I mentioned, pretty big here, more online programs in this than anything else, the 99th percentile. And it's got a reasonable share of total completions at 14-15%. So it is potentially an online play, but that online market's pretty competitive too. By the way, it can also be done on ground. It's really possible to do it in both places, but recognize that if you have this program, and many of you do, it's very competitive already, not the kind of thing you're going to want to start up if you don't have it. So in terms of what degree level, certificate and associate works really well. 85% of graduates have one of those two degrees. And then in terms of who gets hired, we've got, no college or associates really fills up to most of the folks. That's what 65% of people are going to be associate's degree or below, with a few at the bachelor's level, 26%, very limited number at the master's and doctoral level. And here's the one-page summary. And we do these not because we expect you to walk through every number, but just to show you the kind of thing you can have available to you. We have this for each of 1,500 programs, and we can do this for you in your local market for that program. So it's customized, the data is customized for you. And when you get good at this, you can really interpret it very quickly. The colors tell you most of what you need to know. Student demand, dark green, pretty good. Employment, okay, well, that's still good at the 91st percentile in the lighter green. Competition's the problem, it's in red. And then, of course, you can dive down and look at what the particular issues are below that.
So Bob, we have a couple of questions out here. One is for 1L. If we could take a look when you're ready at supply chain management. But the question I had for you, Bob, is how much freedom is there in your software to define your market area? And also, can you do direct comparisons with expanded market areas or similar market areas?
So the first thing we do with a client is sit down and define their market. We do that with data. We ask you for the addresses of your students. We map those, and then we work together to define a custom market that addresses the vast majority of your students. Typically 80–90% will fall in that core market area. Then you'll often have a broader area that you would either is aspirational or that you serve to a lesser degree. And then you may have, if you have online programs, you may want to serve your state or your region and even the country. And sometimes having national data is very helpful to compare that with your own area to see how different you are. So typically a client that works with us is going to have 4 or 5 definitions of their market. One, that very local market where 80–90% of their students come from, a bigger market where they may be attracting students, but at a much lower rate, and particularly maybe online. Then you get state and regional. So you'd have all those inside the system that you'd work with us, and you can move from one market to another with a click of a button. So good question. There's more than one market you'll want to look at, and you would have that if you were working with us. Now, as we transition now from market data, we got a little bit of internal data we'd like to share, and here to see what the economics are of offering this, and particularly, specifically the contribution margin for this program on a per student credit hour basis. We've compared it to 4 or 5 other programs. So the black line or the black box is a hypothetical client. Those numbers have been taken from a real client, but then adjusted so that they're no longer correct, but they're directionally accurate, or roughly right. And you can see computer programming has much higher than average contribution. That's important because people often complain about the cost of their computer science instructor, but despite that cost, it's a very profitable program to run because it usually runs full. In contrast, criminal justice, the margins are actually relatively low. Our client here is below the norm. The median, and shown here in this blue slash, is a little over $100 per student credit hour in contribution margin. The 25th percentile is around 65, and this particular institution is running under that for contribution per student credit hour. We have this data again for hundreds of programs. So when you're thinking about a new program, or you want to evaluate the efficiency of a current program, you can compare it to good benchmark data. Gets all the way down to the course and section level to understand program economics. Now, when we do that, we actually tear it apart so you can see by course level and by discipline how you compare. So here we can see the average program in psychology. Median is about it's about $50 to $100 per credit hour. The client's actually lower than that, and so forth as you work your way across the chart. One other thing I would, and just a quick note here, the average cost per student credit hour in this particular sample is about $111. Our client's running quite a bit lower than that at $80. Now, if I saw that discrepancy, I'd want to make sure I wasn't actually, under-resourcing my instruction. It's a pretty big differential from the average. Then I look at the whiskers here, these outer bounds, and a well-run institution is going to have pretty tight boundaries on what their costs are at a given level. And when you see these whiskers get really far apart, it means that the delivery of your classes is not being super well controlled. So you've got some that are much more expensive potentially than they should be, and others that may be under-resourced. The more expensive being these ones at the top of the whisker, and the under-resourced at the bottom. And you can see that, I'll call it loose management. It's pretty common in our benchmarking database. You get tremendous swings between the most expensive and the least expensive course. And that's because we in higher education have trouble managing this. It's difficult to control that cost because it's driven primarily by the number of students in class, which can vary from year to year, and oftentimes based on faculty preferences of what they teach. So it's difficult to keep it under control. Let me wrap up for you and share with you where the summary for the month. The results on associate certificate demand are mixed, where there's reason for optimism. Google searches rose 6%, but total enrollment is down 4.2% at the associate level and 0.3% at the certificate level. Remember, though, on a more positive note from last month, that new enrollment is actually up 2% and 4% respectively. The fastest growing programs at the associate level, it's cybersecurity. And at the other end of the spectrum, in the certificate world, we've got 25% growth in commercial truck and bus driver. Job postings for certificate associate were down 31%. We're getting back to 2019 levels. So I wouldn't be too concerned unless that number goes down again at that kind of rate next month. Then I'd start to get worried that we might be looking at a recession. Demand for criminal justice and police science programs is healthy. The student demand volume metrics are favorable. There are a fair number of direct prep jobs, but most of your graduates are going to go into something else. And keep in mind, there's a very competitive program, both on ground and online. So if you're facing challenges in enrollment, I think the primary issue here is competition, not really market size or growth. So that's it. We have one program that folks would like to see. So I think that was logistics, supply chain management. So let me turn it over to Wanel for that. And thank you very much for being here with me this month. I'll stick around if you have questions. I'm glad to answer them. And let me stop sharing. Wanel, you ready to go?
Yeah, I am. I lost my Zoom for a second. You would think, 4 years working from Zoom that it wouldn't happen, but it still does. Alrighty, so here we are looking at, I think I heard logistics and supply chain.
Yep.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, I think I heard logistics and supply chain out there from Marianne. So went ahead and opened that up here.
Yes, you're correct. We're looking at supply chain management.
Great. I do have this at the associates and below level here, but keep in mind, one of the categories that we have here is called degree fit. It does exist, associates and below. You can see 7% of completions at the associates nationally and 12% of completions at the certificate level. But there's a large amount of programs here completing, or a large amount of students completing here at the bachelor's level with 66% completions.
Actually, an unusually high number of masters too, at 11%.
So really quickly, what do I see here? What strikes me immediately is, the dark green in student demand and in the darker green in employment, signifying strong student demand metrics and strong employment. Some specific ones to highlight here would be the new student enrollment numbers, international page views, and then the online completion numbers as well are very large in terms of size. And then when it comes to growth metrics, we're seeing some increases in new student enrollment year over year, as well as completion volumes year over year.
A little worrisome on the Google search change. Down 22%. There may be some change in student interest in this program. I've not heard that more generally, but that would, it's one of those ones I'd want to keep an eye on for this and maybe dig into it more deeply and see if that's, a decline in your region as well.
Yeah, and one of the great things about our software is we can actually look at the exact keywords that might be trending down. Is it all the keywords, or are there some that are really driving this down? Are there some that are still going up despite that? It would be really interesting to look at that.
And if you're not fortunate enough to have our systems, you can go to your marketing department and they can get data on Google search volumes out of Google itself. So you can cross-check that number and see if there's something there you should be worried about.
And on the employment side, job posting totals are quite large here. This 130,000 is going to be a 94th percentile value here. What else do we see here? Mean wages, 65,000, just above average here. And then finally, percentage of direct prep jobs, which Bob talked about a little bit today, only at 17%. Here, right? Meaning the percentage of folks working in a field directly related to this, not so large here. So student demand is large.
With this one, though, is that there are going to be all kinds of jobs in logistics or managing logistics that may or may not have been classified as direct prep by NCES. So they could still be in jobs where their training is very helpful, even though they're not exactly in logistics. The other thing you can remember is in that BLS 10th percentile wage and stuff, you get a lot of folks who didn't go to college who are working in a warehouse who are going to get counted in here. So it does drive the mean wages down. Another metric we keep is the wages for people with a bachelor's degree, which we get from the national, a national part of the census, and at 102,000, that's a pretty good wage. So that I think is more indicative of what you'd end up with if you became a manager in logistics as opposed to, warehouse worker. Far away, Winnow.
Yeah, and then in the competitive intensity, just the story here really would focus around the volume of in-market competition. We're seeing a lot of campuses. Remember, we're looking at the national market here specifically for associates and below. 111 campuses, that's a 91st percentile volume here. This has increased by 6 campuses year over year. Both of these metrics resulting in a decrease here for the competitive score. And then finally, the saturation numbers for Google search cost per click and the competition index are, pretty alarming here in this case. It is going to be expensive to try and capture that search engine optimization, the clicks in the Google space here for this program. And then finally, this is a program that is being offered and completed online in this case.
Let me grab the screen back for a moment. And just to wrap up, I mentioned at the beginning that, we got to be very careful about all these negative messages floating around about, how there are no jobs. And you don't really need to go to college to be successful and all that sort of thing. What I'm doing research on right now, and I welcome anybody who has thoughts on it, is how do you actually grow? Because in every sector in higher ed, there are institutions who are growing. And we've begun to capture those in a podcast series I'm running called Grow, Grow, Grow. And I am doing independent research on that, and ultimately we'll write a book about it. But don't lose heart. You can grow. There are things you can do that can allow you to increase enrollment, whether that's adding programs or investing in the right existing programs to grow. And last but not least, if you want to learn more about program evaluation and management, there is a book on the subject. It happens that I wrote it. So if you'd like, please feel free to pick up a copy on Amazon, or if you're really interested, give us a call and we'll discuss it with you. We will be doing more webcasts. We do them every month. And for community colleges, the next one is on August 30th at 2 p.m. Thanks again for joining us today. I hope you all enjoyed it. And glad to answer any questions you have afterwards if you want to shoot me an email.